So it seems that the Orky Elite are looking rather interesting in the new Codex. Let's weld some armor plates together and talk about the toughest boys in the army in the Meganobz. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Orks once more, and in this video we're talking about the armoured claw of the Orky Elite and seeing what these fancy Orks can do in game. It seems the Codex has changed things in quite a big way for them, with not one but two detachments that can make them just spectacularly tanky, and I have a feeling that unless their points go up in a big way, we might be seeing a fair few more of them on the table. Meganobz are pretty much the Orky version of a Terminator, as you'd imagine in the rough and ready Orky way, pretty much replacing fine craftsmanship and artisan armour with the sheer size and power of their piston-driven creations. The richest, meanest and most battle-scarred knobs will commission a mech to build them a suit of mega armour once they've amassed a suitable quantity of teeth, this mighty armour turning them into essentially a violent, small Orky walking tank, armed with fancy power claws and saws, and built in with the knob's prized shooters. They're pretty much the epitome of what Orks aspire to in their might makes right, and often serve as retinues in council for their Warbosses, no doubt looking for their right moment to rise up and take control of the clan. Models wise, I must admit the Meganobz kit is a pretty expensive one from Games Workshop, currently £42.50, €55 or $70. A bit of an unfortunate price tag for a 3-model kit I think, particularly as they don't even cost all that many points in game. It's only 30 points per Meganobz, so that's around about 1.3 points per dollar. Pretty low even for Orks, so the investment doesn't exactly get you that many points of Ork on the board. Kind of weird to see these guys just so much more pricey than certain things like say Deathwing Terminators for example per model. I'd guess Games Workshop maybe charges a bit more for them, both because they have a fair amount of different options between claws and saws, plus they have the option to build a big mech in the unit, and Games Workshop does often like to add a character tax. I think models wise they're okay. Chunky and boxy armoured Orks. At least the kits have a fair bit of flexibility, though at least personally they're maybe not my favourite miniatures out of the whole Ork line. Feel like maybe they could have just been a little bit more dynamic and dangerous looking. That's completely personal opinion though. I do really like them as a unit idea. I certainly like the Mega Armoured Warboss and Ghazghkull's models, maybe just a bit more than these guys myself. In any case though, if you were looking to pick up some Orky Armoured Elites, then you can always get them a bit cheaper from discount retailers. On expensive models, it's extra nice to get a little bit more of a discount if you can. And as ever, I do have a fair few discount retailers linked in the video description. Element Games in the UK, Gap Games in Australia, Fenris Workshop in Canada, and Wargame Portal in the USA. Can be a way to help save a bit of money on the Meganobz and help support Auspex Tactics a little bit. With these guys you could get them for £37 in the UK or $60 in the US. Let's get into the good stuff though and start out with their rules. Meganobz come in squads of between 2 and 6 models, having a bit of unusual unit flexibility in 10th edition due to the ability to build one of their number as a mech. You can choose any number between 2 and 6 besides 4 specifically, and they're 30 points per model, so a maxed out squad is 180. We are still waiting to see if points change in a major way between the pre-codex and post-codex, though most of the time for 40k things they've generally tended to stay at least fairly similar to what came before. On the base stat line they move 5 inches, so are a little bit slower than your standard Orks. They can use transports quite well to get up close, where they take up 2 slots. They've got Leadership 7 and Objective Control 1, so not particularly big presence on objectives if they're contested. And maybe the most standout thing about their datasheet is their durability. Toughness 6, a 2+ save and 3 wounds each does mean that small arms aren't going to have much effect on them at all. You're basically going to need special weapons or heavy weapons to take them down, ideally with a fair bit of AP to get rid of that big armor save and potentially any cover saves they might have. At 10 points per wound, I feel like that's really quite a respectable profile. Finally, for their core things, they do also have the grenade keyword, which is interesting enough. Most Terminator equivalents don't get that in 40k. They can still lob some stick bombs at the enemy for a little bit of extra mortal wound damage opportunistically if they think it's going to tip the balance. Weapons-wise, the Meganobz are perhaps a slightly unusually flexible unit in 40k. They can mix and match any of their 4 different wargear options. Each Meganobz gets the option of combi weapon versus custom shooter and power saw versus kill saw, and you can go dual melee loadouts as well. So you could take 1 kill saw and 1 power claw, or a twin kill saw loadout. While they can shoot out a bit of volume fire and certainly primarily focus on the melee, the custom shooters will get you 6 shots at strength 4, AP 0, damage 1 within 9 inches, so usually 2 hits there per guy. The combi weapon's just the 2 shots within 12 inches, and it's anti-infantry and devastating wounds. You'll get far less hits, but those hits will leave a much better mark on infantry. Both of them are kind of okay to have, though aren't really games changing. Otherwise, for their melee gear, the Killsaw has an anti-vehicle sort of profile, 2 attacks at strength 12, AP 3, damage 2. The Power Claw gets 3 attacks at strength 9, AP 2, damage 2, so it's a bit more focused on killing Space Marines. And then if you take the Twin Killsaw, you don't get any extra attacks, but the attacks that you do have are twin linked, so are really quite powerful against taking down heavy stuff. That does give you quite a lot of options for how to field them in close combat, and the damage breaks down like this. I'd argue that perhaps the double saw is the best overall melee loadout, at least if AP matters. A unit of 3 of them with no buffs and no war and things do about 3 wounds to a Land Raider on average, around about 4 or 5 wounds to a Rhino, and fairly even versus things like Intercessors and Terminators compared with the single claw. The only thing the Power Claw does outperform on this one is the standard infantry, getting a few more kills against termagants with their high volume of attacks. It does depend on how much you value the shooting though, getting 2 strength 4 hits isn't nothing per guy, and that would help thin out hordes even further. I feel like they genuinely are a unit that you could field in several different ways fairly comfortably. Depends on whether or not you want just an absolute melee powerhouse, or something that's a bit better against lighter infantry, or somewhere in between with the other loadouts. Hopefully on one of their key turns they'll be fighting in the War, which improves these numbers quite a bit. It's kind of big for both claws and saws. The double saw will really like the extra attack from just 2 at base, and the power claws will really like the +1 strength. Going to strength 10 is quite a big deal for them, and of course the extra attack is helpful there too. Finally, for their datasheet, talking about their War, they got particularly tanky in the new Orky Codex. Now for Meganobz, the War gives them a 4+ feel no pain rule. That was a rule that was changed from pre-Codex from a devastating wounds type rule when they were in the War, which was kind of helpful, but I feel like was often not the biggest deal in the world. They already had fairly punchy attacks that might well have penetrated AP anyway, and a lot of the wounds wouldn't have been devastating. I do think that the 4+ feel no pain in the War is a much more impactful rule a lot of the time. It might not matter so much if you declare it while you're embarked on a transport and then charge out of it perhaps, but if you're going first with the War and call it, move out, destroy some enemy units, and then have the 4+ feel no pain to tank return fire, that could be very big indeed. It's absolutely huge against things like damage 3 weapons in particular, which would go for one-shotting a Meganobz to almost definitely not doing so. Overall, for their base strengths and weaknesses, I would say that they've got solid enough melee against standard marines and tougher targets to keep them meaningful, though they're not really standout damage dealers. They've got quite a low volume of attacks that hit on 4s, and -1 damage rules could really hurt them as well. Dropping down from damage 2 to damage 1 would be a big deal. They are however really quite good on the defensive. 3 wounds at toughness 6 with a 2+ save is a tough nut to crack for that points cost, and doubly so when they're in the War for the feel no pain. Otherwise, they're a unit that seems to have some really quite good support now. Bully Boys, Warhorde, Dread Mob, and Cult of Speed, and even Green Tide can all offer them something kind of good, and that feels like more detachments than the vast majority of units are useful for. On top of that, they've got some really good leader options and transport options as well, that I'll get onto in just a second. For downsides, I guess, they are fairly slow. They likely need some investment in transports to get them there, unless you just foot slog them. Feels like against certain armies that could be a big mistake. And otherwise they are just going to have a lot of competition for Orky melee units to try and smash the enemy's face in with. Lots of competition from Knobs, Boyz, Squighog Boys, and Beast Snaggers, all led by their own characters. Overall, definitely enough to keep them interesting though. Talking of leaders, I feel like the Big Mech in Mega Armor is a particularly standout one for them. It was 85 points pre-Codex, and it's basically a 5-wound Meganobz that gets an extra attack on his Power Claw or Killsaw, the Power Claw hitting on a 3+ as well. The main reason that you'd want to add him to a Meganobz unit is defense. He can take a custom force field for a 4+ invulnerable save against ranged attacks. That's really quite nice given that you might often get shot by melter fire and things with these sort of units. It's going to be pretty efficient against them. And then giving them a better chance to survive, he can then start to patch them back up again. He revives 1 Meganobz per command phase, patching the armor up. His Grot Oiler can cause 1 to regain D3 lost wounds as well, which is rather nice. And he does buff their shooting slightly if they have it. Certainly feels like an interesting option for Bully Boys with the 4+ feel no pain, and he could make them at least a somewhat interesting unit in Dread Mob as well, giving them the mech keyword for the special rules and things. Talking of the Bully Boys, Meganobz do basically have a detachment to focus around them now. The core rule for the detachment is getting 2 Wars if you've got a Warboss on the table, but the second War only affects Warbosses, Knobs and Meganobz units. It's quite a huge rule just in itself, given that you get all the benefits of the extra melee violence, plus the invulnerable save and advance and charge, just all round makes the units better for a couple of turns. Though for Meganobz it's just pretty standout amazing, given that they get the further massive boost in the War of getting the 4+ feel no pain. It just makes them a ridiculously durable and dangerous unit, and this one for 2 turns in a row. If you have one of those big mechs in the unit, then for 265 points, you could have a 7 model squad that's got a total of 20 wounds at toughness 6 with a 2+ save. In the War, they get a 4+ invulnerable save at range and a 5+1 in melee. The 5+ feel no pain, there to get rid of a lot of damage once you've even got through all that. You could easily have cover at range and potentially the -1 AP stratagem if it's worth it enough to use. And then once your opponent has likely tried and failed to wipe out the unit, the big mech then can restore a model, potentially putting him closer to the enemy for a shorter charge, and also heal D3 wounds on one model with the grot. There'd be no restriction on having 3 copies of such a unit if you desired, either just clanking up the big board on foot, or maybe taking one model out of the squad to run them in trucks perhaps. I feel like that's really quite a scary Deathwing formation of the Meganobz, that most armies are just simply not going to have the damage to efficiently kill these things, or at least without dumping an entire army's worth of firepower into one single unit. It does feel like that's going to cause a lot of pressure on the enemy just then and there. Basically nothing is going to be particularly efficient against such a unit in terms of shooting. They're going to be dealing with multiple massive squads like that for a couple of turns, never mind anything else that your Orky army is doing at the same time. It doesn't end there for the Bully Boys though. You could have reroll or hit rolls for 1 CP. That one also feels like it could be a very nice staple one for keeping them far more dangerous given that they hit on a 4+. And other maybe slightly more niche ones like mortal wound impact hits, bonus consolidation if that makes a difference, or forcing desperate escape tests if it's going to be big. If you wanted to give one squad a Mega Boss leader as well, the Mega Armoured Warboss can get a deep strike enhancement, which could be kind of fun to do rapid ingress if you want. Really quite a scary, destructive and very tough unit to do that with. Talking of which, the Mega Armoured Warboss I think is a fairly good HQ as well. 80 points for a 7 wound Mega Armoured character, so quite a lot of toughness there, and he makes the squad a lot more dangerous. 4 attacks at strength 12, AP -2 damage 2 that will help out against heavies. Perhaps more importantly, a +1 to the hits that will help out the rest of the squad's claws or saws. Plus he gets extra savage in the War, damage 3 hits with the huge chopper, and a 5+ invulnerable save as well. Again with a nice in the War enhancement, he's pretty awesome in Bully Boys too, and certainly could help out the squad against 3 wound infantry or big tough vehicles. He's a big threat in his own right. I'd say that Bully Boys and perhaps the generic Warhorde are perhaps some of the best attachments for Meganobz, though I had seen a good few places where people were mentioning that they look actually kind of daft in Green Tide as well. A detachment where Meganobz should really not really be a focal unit at all. Generally all the buffs besides enhancement affects boys or units of 10 or more models, neither of which applies to the Meganobz. The core rule is boys units get a 5+ invulnerable save, and then any Orc unit with 10 or more models in it gets to reroll saving throws of a 1. However, I'm not sure if Games Workshop really anticipated that, but there's an enhancement called Raucous Warcaller that allows you to count an infantry unit as 10 or more models all the time if you've got a leader in a unit that's less than 10 models. That means that it can effectively give your Meganobz a 2+ rerollable save against small arms. A ridiculous durability spike there, which means that you're only failing 1 in every 36 attacks that don't have any AP, or are AP1 against Meganobz in cover. Essentially they're pretty much invincible there. That amounts to a casual 600% durability boost against AP0 or AP-1 profiles that they were kind of tanky against anyway. Admittedly it's not quite as huge against higher AP things. It's a 20% durability boost if you're saving on a 4+, or a big 50% if you're saving on a 3+, but either way it's really quite impactful to have a reroll once to save rule on a 2+ armor save unit. I'm genuinely not 100% sure whether that's strong enough to be considered competitive at all. I feel like the majority of lower AP things or AP1 was generally going to be targeted elsewhere anyway. But even rerolling saves of 1 against a unit with a 4+ invulnerable or a 3+ save after cover and AP has been taken account of, and you do have a unit that's a lot tankier than it would normally be. And being near enough invincible against small arms fire and small AP attacks of units that they're tagging in combat is quite a big thing. Otherwise, getting onto transports, the sturdy truck is a pretty reasonable choice for getting them to the fight, 65 points pre-codex, and the datasheet was unchanged in the codex. They will remain very good and a cheap way to get speed up the board. They're tanky enough for the points that you're likely to need at least some fairly high strength weapons to take them down. and it can transport 12 models, so that means you could have 5 Meganobz plus an attached character, say a Warboss or a Big Mech. Not quite a maxed out unit there, but near enough that it's efficient, I think. I feel like these will remain being popular. The only downside is if they manage to get popped too early, you ideally don't want the Meganobz just foot-slogging it up the board on 5 inches. You'd have to make sure they hide out of line of sight quite well of any guns that might just kill them outright, as you don't want the elites out of the game for a few turns. Transports can just be quite nice if you have moved up the board as well to get them out somewhere threatening. If you have moved a truck out into the midfield, then it's often good to park it next to a ruin. If the enemy pops it, then they could disembark somewhere out of line of sight and keep them safe until they launch their own charge in your turn. Meganobz can go in plenty of other transports as well, Stompers and Gorkanauts and Morkanauts and things. I'd say maybe the Battle Wagon looks like the other interesting one to consider. It's got an absolutely massive transport capacity of 22, and just has a bit more focal durability with 16 wounds, toughness 12 if you take the hard case. That's all quite good for 160 points. Never mind the fact that it debuffs enemy AP. Unfortunately, at time of recording, it doesn't look like they've sorted out the Battle Wagon's transport capacity. Still looks like if you take Ghazghkull Thracker in it, then he can't quite fit 2 Meganobz in due to Makari being there. Speaking of whom, the big boss himself got a lot better in the Ork Codex. Ghazghkull Thracker was previously at 235 points, and now he's even more scary than he was before. Meganobz are the only unit that he can join, so they're going to be really interesting whenever he's around. +1 to hit and +1 to wound just makes them enormously scary, and that does work on his own attacks as well. Plus you get critical hits on a 5+ in the turn of the War, and Makari gives them lethal hits to make that relevant, though it could be good in War Tribe as well. Between him and a unit of Meganobz, you should be pretty effective against just about anything that you can catch in melee in the game. Perhaps the biggest downside though is that you're going to be foot slogging if you want to take him alongside Meganobz, though if you point him and a bunch of armoured orcs towards a midfield objective, I'm sure you're going to cause some sort of problems, and they can get a fairly long charge off in the War turn. Otherwise, for supporting things, we've already mentioned the War a couple of times, but advance and charge is big. 3 attack kill saws and strength 10 power claws with 4 attacks are both nice, and vulnerable saves might not be the biggest thing for them, but it will help against things like Melter from time to time, and of course their 4+ feel no pain is huge. For the core book stratagems, 1 command point for grenades could occasionally help out with a little bit more mortal wounds if you'd like. Might be worth remembering that they exist on the unit at least, but otherwise I think you might get most value out of things like command point rerolls for charges, as a failed or successful charge is going to be huge for these guys. Otherwise I might not dwell quite as much on the Warhorde, as people are kind of familiar with that from the index, though I still think it's probably one of the best attachments for them. If you want aggressive orcs moving forward, then sustained hits is pretty great for them hitting on a 4+. You've got the 1 CP for sustained hits on a 5+, 1 command point for Kareen if their transports blow up, which is handy. 1 command point for -1 to wound, which is nice when you've got that tanky toughness 6 profile, and 1 CP for a +2 to advance and charge for infantry. That can put them on a surprising turn of speed across the tabletop. Otherwise, for detachment things though, Dread Mob, I guess you can use the benefits at range and in melee with a big mech, means that you could be getting lethal and sustained or the extra AP both at range and melee, potentially with no downsides if you just roll them randomly, which might not necessarily be the worst idea unless you desperately need, say, lethal hits to wound something that you're wounding on a 5+. I feel like given the mech's rerolls, plus actually making the shooting kind of good with the random buffs, it might genuinely be worth taking the shooters here. They're still not going to be doing too much damage to enemy heavies, but should be able to thin out some hordes at least. Finally, for Cult of Speed, it does make Meganobz their truck a bit better. You could use the move drop charge enhancement with them to get a very long charge with otherwise slow models, and there's one to get a truck of 4+ invulnerable save as well. That could help ensure their ride doesn't go down too early. Maybe not specifically amazing for Meganobz more so than other Orky elites like the standard Nobs though. There's plenty of options that you could do that with. Overall though, I feel like Meganobz got a really big improvement in the new codex. Swapping out the devastating wounds melee for a 4+ feel no pain is kind of huge, particularly as often in the War you're on a turn when you're going to be getting hit back hard. Otherwise I feel like Bully Boys might make them a lot more tempting to play. For early impressions at least, it does look like one of the stronger Orky detachments. 2 turns worth of War and 4+ feel no pain Meganobz seems kind of immense. Feels like you could easily use 3 big units of them there if you wanted to. Though otherwise they still seem fine in Warhorde, and Green Tide has that slightly surprising reroll saves thing. Not 100% sure if that'll survive errata or not, but at least until then they could perhaps be surprisingly effective there. For how I'd feel myself, I'd likely want a transport for most units of them. Trucks or wagons both seem at least fairly reasonable, and I have seen people use both fairly small squads and fairly big squads of them in the past. I think there are merits to both of them. If you're taking a big squad, I'd want to be taking a character. Maybe the Big Mech is one of my favourite choices given the reviving Meganobz from the grave, but the Warboss is also pretty nice, and Ghazghkull did get a fair bit better with the Codex, given that he has his sweep mode on his Gork's Claw now, plus the critical hits thing. In Theory Craftland, it at least seems kind of fun to put 18 Meganobz on the table with 3 mechs and just have a big Orky Deathwing formation that the enemy's going to really struggle to deal with, and then break some heads with some snapping claws as you get War for 2 turns and the big melee damage. Ideally, I think if the stars align for them, they want to be getting a big long charge off in the turn of the war, maybe charging out of transports, maybe from behind terrain, smash some enemies, remain standing on an objective after that, and be ready to tank what return damage is inevitably coming on their 4+ feel no pains. I feel like they're a unit that you might really want to think about fine positioning and where they might wind up after melee as well. If you can get at least some of them with a cover save, then it's going to make a huge difference for 2+ armor save models, and against plenty of weapons could definitely make the difference between taking more casualties or not doing so. In any case, they're looking fairly fun on first impressions. It's kind of nice to see them maybe a little bit more fearsome and scary than they have been in the past. I feel like they've often been a unit that's not really bad, but not really stand out great either. Though I guess we'll have to wait and see until the digital points come out, how they're going to stack up against things like Warbosses with Knobs or Boys, or Beast Snagger Boys with Beast Bosses. I'm really looking forward to seeing what sort of army lists get played in tournaments when the book goes fully live, and people get to show the rest of the galaxy why Gork and Mork is best. In any case, look forward to hearing your thoughts on the Meganobz. Do you think that the tanky 4+ feel no pain and the new detachments are enough to make them interesting? Will full-on Deathwing Orks be good enough to compete with the rest of the horrors of 40k? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.